Hi. I mentioned in our Time for All Ages that I'm joined by my committee on ministry, which is Tom Lockery, Catherine Martin, and Sherry Lushan. One of the roles of the committee on ministry, which might be a term that may or may not be familiar to all of you, is that part of what they do is they look after kind of the health of the congregation. So are we living out our mission? How are we treating one another? What can we improve upon? What do we do really well? And the board does this too, but the COM, as they're known, committee on ministry, often takes on projects that help the board and the congregation. Now, this last year, we decided to look closer at the policies we have around helping people be kind to one another. That is, having healthy boundaries. Now, we already had some really strong policies, in particular when it comes to protecting our children, but we had some little gaps here and there in our policy around adults. So after a lot of research, we've come up with a more comprehensive policy about healthy boundaries, and we thought we'd put together this service that introduces you to that policy, but also talks about how we can have healthy boundaries in our lives in general, right? What does it mean to have healthy boundaries? Because as Brene Brown, she points out that boundaries are key. They're frickin' key, right? As she says, to living a wholehearted life, a life of joy and happiness. Now, we're a really loving congregation. This is a really healthy congregation. It's one of the reasons why I chose 7 years ago to come here, because I knew it was a very healthy congregation. And we want everyone to be welcome. And every person is welcome here. But not all behaviors are welcome. Now, let me give you an extreme example of what we mean by that. And this is a true example. I was talking with a colleague that I was going to do this service on boundaries, and he's like, oh, let me tell you about one. This is really hilarious. And I was like, seriously? So this happened years ago, and it was in a church. I'll just say it's up in Washington State. I won't say which one. But there was a longtime member there who was something of an activist, who had learned that there was this really interesting way to protest that he'd read about it in the 1960s, that if you don't like something, that you strip. Okay? Start taking off your clothes. Now, unfortunately, he decided that it wasn't just for protesting against great injustices, but decided that whenever he disagreed with the speaker or minister, on Sunday morning, he would start to undress. I don't think he went all the way to the butt or anything, but he would start to undress. So, now my understanding is that this went on for years in this congregation, and you never knew if he would start to undress. And people who knew him, they said, oh, it's just so-and-so, No one said anything because he was this really long time and generally really loved person in the congregation. Now, new people, of course, just never came back when that happened. I mean, would you? I'm not sure. I'd be like, okay. Finally, they got a new minister who came along and said, okay, no, this is not good. We need to stop this. And it was hard. The guy was a beloved long-term member of the congregation. They didn't want to hurt his feelings. He just thought it was funny, right? For him, it was okay. But it was not okay for everyone else. It was disrespectful. And ultimately, it did end well. They put up the boundary, and he did stop. So, but isn't it kind of interesting, right? Like our Western culture, and also, you use as well, our Unitarian Universalists, we can be very concerned about not wanting to insult anyone, concerned about confrontation, right? We don't insult anyone, to the point where sometimes we allow ourselves to be disrespected. And that's not healthy, right? And we don't have a lot of rules as Unitarian Universalists. We aren't going to tell you what to believe. We're not going to tell you who you can love. We're not going to tell you that you have to do X, Y, Z or you're going to go to hell. You don't even have to bow, genuflect, or pray if you don't want to. But what we do have, what binds us together, is this thing called a covenant. And a covenant is simply, it's just a promise, right? Not written in blood, you don't have to give your firstborn. It's just a way that we agree as a community to be with one another. Right? They sort of say, that it's a promise that wherever our spiritual paths may lead, we will walk them together. Right? Well, we're going to walk together. We've got to have some ground rules, some boundaries in a sense, right? And we have a lot of them here in the church. They basically ask us to treat one another nicely. They recognize that we're walking together with all of our differences, and we need to have boundaries, how to treat one another. So, for example, some of our covenants are aspirational. And we say one every time we light our chalice. Love is the spirit of this church, right? That's an aspirational. This is the way that we want to be in the world. And there are some that are more practical. Like the board has a covenant that whenever they get together, that, we'll be respectful to one another, but we'll also show up on time, we'll be prepared, that kind of thing. That's also a covenant. Our new healthy boundaries policy is a kind of covenant. And it's both aspirational and practical. It addresses when someone feels their boundary has been violated, whether that's by a staff member, a minister, or another congregant. Now this morning, as I mentioned, I'm joined by my committee on ministry, Sherry, Catherine, and Tom. They're all longtime beloved members of this church, and as far as I know, they've never tried to undress in the church. So they're helping. So together today with some fun skits, we're going to talk about boundaries. So I invite Tom, Sherry, and Catherine up to join me.
Good morning. Good morning. What do we mean by healthy boundaries? Brene Brown defines a boundary as what is okay and not okay. And that is going to vary with each person. Another way to think about healthy boundaries is to think about healthy relationships. And there are three aspects to a relationship: oneself, the other, and the context. And I have already violated this morning, and I need to make a personal apology to Sean, because she was speaking and she started to describe that Brene Brown was a psychologist, and my social work partner went, "No, she's a social worker." I said, "No, Sean, that was inappropriate. I apologize to you, Sean." So you get it. The context of the church, my beloved minister, and myself, all three in that context, okay? Okay, so all three need to be respected, and we're going to show another example here.
Tom, I need to talk to you about this morning's service.
Yeah, I know. We've got to figure out exactly how we're going to...
Hey, did you guys see the new Star Wars movie?
Yes, John, I did, and I'd love to talk to you about it. But Tom and I need to prepare for the service. Can I talk to you about it a little bit later?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So here, Catherine is setting a boundary to respect herself, Tom, and Reverend Sean, as well as the context. Now, Catherine could have just been annoyed with Sean and snapped at her, assuming that, quote, "people suck on purpose just to make me angry," unquote, as Brene Brown said. But Catherine doesn't make that assumption. She assumes that Sean is doing the best she can and just wants to share something with her. So she responds with empathy. Most people can understand these types of boundaries. These boundaries can be set anytime and anywhere, with your family, at your work, and of course, at our church, like that example. But the more comprehensive policy we have been working on is more about the really tough boundaries, such as when people feel violated, physically or sexually. There are three types of boundaries. One is verbal, which relates to how you use your words towards someone. One is nonverbal, how you relate to someone else with your body language. And third, physical, that is related to personal space and to touch. So let's look at how verbal boundaries can be violated. By gossiping, by negatively labeling somebody, by being inappropriately sexually explicit in a social context, or telling an off-color joke, and by sexually harassing someone. Now, for the most part, these violations don't happen here at church, but they can happen in the wider world, and it has happened to me at work, and I'm going to share it with you. I was working at a social service agency here in Orange County and discovered that my director was giving illegal kickbacks. So I went to the board and told them, and then realized they were in on it.
Oh, God.
Okay. So I wrote an immediate letter of resignation and left. Went home, and took my phone off the hook and left it off the hook for a week. And by the way, I was 3 months pregnant.
Oh.
After a week, put the phone back on the hook and ring, and guess what? It was my director. And he said to me, Sharon, I knew you were going to be a mother. I didn't know you were a MFer.
Oh.
All right. Now, I realize that's strange and extreme, but it was real. It was very devastating. So now, let's go to a lighter example of what might happen in most of our day-to-day lives.
Hey, Catherine, did you talk to Tom about going to see that Star Wars movie the next week?
I sure did. He said he was going to set it up.
Oh, I haven't heard from him.
Oh, he's such a flake.
Calling a person a name is not respecting their dignity and worth or principle, and it dehumanizes the person. That's a boundary violation. It's not okay. How might Reverend Sean put up a boundary?
You know, I know you must be frustrated, but you know, I don't experience Tom that way. Why don't you give him a call and see what's up?
That's a great idea. I'll do that.
Calling someone out on breaking a boundary doesn't have to be confrontational. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to respect and affirm the dignity of all people. It's our first principle. We do that in part by not labeling people. Now let's look at boundaries, how they can be violated non-verbally. This is where the person is not saying anything derogatory to you, but their body language is some way suggestive or intimidating. Remember my director that I told you about? Well, on an earlier occasion, I had gone into the office to talk to him about something. He's sitting at his desk. He comes around and he comes right up in my face. And I felt very uncomfortable, so I started backing up. And he starts coming more and more. And I realized I am almost in the corner. What am I going to do? So I just said, I need to leave, and slipped out the side. It was very intimidating and it was dominating. And I have come to believe that dominance is a part of every boundary violation. What I've said again is a pretty extreme example, but they're real. Hopefully you haven't experienced something like that, but you may have experienced being looked up and down, stared at, leered at, and made very uncomfortable.
How you doing?
Catherine, that makes me kind of uncomfortable. So I think maybe it's best if I just leave.
Oh, I'm really sorry, Tom.
Okay, so this is what nonverbal violations can look like. And now let's take a look at physical and sexual boundary violations. In terms of violating a physical boundary, this is when there is some form of physical aggression toward the person attacking or forcefully holding them. And in terms of sexual boundaries, this can range from unwanted touching to sexual assault. The bottom line, again, is that dominance and force are involved.
Sorry. Is there one more paragraph?
Maybe there is, I don't know.
Okay, sorry. Sometimes something as simple as a hug can be considered unwanted touching, as you saw during Time for All Ages.
It's probably best to ask, if you don't know for sure, that the other person is comfortable being hugged.
So why did the Committee on Ministry work on these issues? It's not like issues come up here every day at church. They don't. But they do come up in our lives, and for those of you who've been part of the church for a long time, you know that they've come up here too. No community is immune from people with unhealthy boundaries. In fact, we all sometimes break a boundary. It's part of being human. Our covenantal faith asks that when we break a boundary, we apologize and come back into covenant. That is, we respect the other person's boundaries. Like you, we want the church to be a safe and healthy place for everyone.
In any community, we are going to step on each other's toes, such as interrupting each other. Learning to set boundaries for the toe-stepping type actions is important for everyone to feel welcome and respected. But sometimes a boundary gets crossed where you may no longer feel safe and comfortable. In this community, if you ever experience a serious violation of your boundaries, the congregational leadership is prepared to address this issue. You can tell one of us on the Committee on Ministry, Reverend Sean, Reverend Judy, our Director of Religious Education, or the Board President, who's currently Deborah Kwam, whoever you feel the most comfortable talking with. That person or persons will then work to create a healthy boundaries response team. People to support you and work through what needs to happen. The Healthy Boundaries Response Team is comprised of people based on their experience and expertise and is formed as needed rather than being a standing committee of the board.
If you'd like to learn more about the Healthy Boundaries policies, we have some copies here available for you, and they're also going to be on the website in the members section, so you can find a copy there as well. But these will be up front for you afterwards.
So I want to thank Catherine, Tom, and Sherry.
Yes.
I really appreciate them taking this all very seriously because we all want to have that safe community and create a loving world. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're a covenantal faith, and we have many different covenants, both aspirational and practical. And one of them is our Healthy Relations Covenant, which is, I think, both. So let's read that covenant on healthy relations together that was adopted by this congregation in 2012.
We, the members, friends, staff, and ministers of Orange Coast Unitarian Universalist Church, acknowledge and commit ourselves to the work of sustaining our beloved community, welcoming all in good faith, ministering to each other, and adhering to the following standards. Be direct, honest, and respectful toward one another in a spirit of compassion. Make our church a safe place to express our deepest fears and our greatest joys. Forgive ourselves and others when we fall short of expectations, willing to call ourselves back to the covenant and allow humor and optimism to move us forward. Express gratitude and appreciation toward one another. Honor established process of resolving conflict where differences become chronic. Support our church with generous gifts of time, talent, and money in gratitude for the fellowship, joy, and inspiration we receive in accord with our ability. Make decisions guided by the congregation's vision, supported by our values, grounded in the common good. Model Unitarian Universalist principles within our community and beyond, seeking engagement with the larger communities around us and the larger world, that our light might shine broadly.
Amen.
Please rise in body or spirit as we sing.